But this isn't particularly good news, is it? Is it a veiled threat from the United States? Is it an unveiled threat?
In fairness, I don't think it's actually a threat either way. It is more of a warning. I mean, look, I'm currently based in Washington, and again, it's quite striking actually in conversations with people in policy circles, their concerns about the degree to which Ukraine, which at one point, particularly, I mean, given Zelensky's astonishing star power, shall we say, as a national advocate, was incredibly sure-footed, a sense that actually the Ukrainians aren't doing the legwork in making sure that the countries, which are after all stumping up billions every month in military and financial assistance, get to feel that they are part of the process. So I think this is it. It's more of a sort of, shall we say, a friendly warning than a threat, but it speaks to, I think, a very real concern.
But Mark, what is President Zelensky supposed to do? What is Ukraine supposed to do? Because from the very beginning, world leaders, including at that time Boris Johnson, our prime minister, talked about never compromising, it never being possible to compromise with Russia, and that the Ukrainians needed to be supported to push back against this Russian aggression. Otherwise, there would be no lessons learned, and Russia would continue to be, a terrifying pariah in the world. So if Ukraine is now being encouraged to compromise, what for the last year and a bit of suffering?
I think that we've got to realize that there's a different thing between actual compromise and the optics. And a lot of this is about optics. I mean, what we've seen of late is, for example, Zelensky actually making it illegal for Ukraine to negotiate with Russia so long as Putin is still president. Now, I can totally understand the emotional and political motives behind that, but nonetheless, from the point of view of certainly a fair number of European countries, which are always a little bit more lukewarm about this whole conflict, from their point of view, that's basically Zelensky saying there can be no talks because, realistically, Putin is not going to stand down by his own choice any day now. So I think it is as much as anything else about the Americans just simply saying to the Ukrainians, don't take all this for granted. Realize that you actually need to, at least give the impression that you would be willing to talk if there were any meaningful conversations to be had. Look, at the moment, there is nothing to talk about. That's absolutely true.
Well, that's what I was going to
Positions of the
say.
Ukrainians and the Russians are so far.
President Zelensky saying, we can't talk while they're still occupying Crimea. We can't talk while the Wagner Group is still gallivanting across Ukraine, committing hideous atrocities. We can't talk while Russia's still invading us. And that all seems pretty legitimate, doesn't it?
Look, I mean, this is not about legitimacy, as I said. This is about politics. And alas, the two things don't always overlap. I think that the point is rather that what the Americans would like the Ukrainians to be doing is at least to be going through the motion saying, look, under the right circumstances, we would be willing to talk. Because at present, this is what the Russians are doing. And look, of course, it's just politics. There is nothing behind it. The Russians have no intention of any kind of meaningful discussion with the Ukrainians, especially not that involves precisely withdrawing from the Ukrainian territory that they've stolen.
Exactly, and hence the reason that surely it's not very helpful for America to be talking about tiring, at this point in time, what with the war, I mean, pretty much, still raging.
But the point is, that is the reality of the situation. Look, it's not actually, I think, as if there are any countries which are deciding that they're not going to be wanting to support Ukraine. But on the other hand, given the massive price tag, there is a concern, and I said, particularly we're talking about certain European countries, that they're just no longer willing to, essentially put up with the same level of expenditure. So I think what the Americans are really trying to do to the Ukrainians in saying, look, you need to shore up some of your support. It doesn't involve making concessions to the Russians. What it does do is just simply making it clear that you are not so determined to actually sort of win a war before there can be any conversations. Look, it's not actually as if anyone's saying to the Ukrainians, you have to be sitting down with Putin here and now. That's not the case at all. It's about optics. And it's not just about Europe. It's also about the global South. There are a lot of countries we would like to see being supportive of the sanctions regime, who at the moment, frankly, are not. They say, look, this is just a European war. This has nothing to do with us. And part of the reason is because the Russians are actually doing, and the Chinese as well, a very good propaganda effort there. And basically saying this is all about the Americans trying to control us. Well, the Americans are saying we want some help.
Speaking of propaganda, though, isn't this playing completely into the hands of the Russians, though. I mean, we've been seeing significant progress in terms of the war effort in Ukraine, but here is a sort of window of opportunity for Russia to say, look, the Ukrainians are impossible. They won't even talk, as you say, not because Russia's particularly offering to, but, as you say, it's all about optics, and the optics provided by America by this, closely guarded secret conversation that's now public, are that there is a possibility, there is a time when they may not support Ukraine to the extent that they have, which obviously is a gift to the Russians.
That's perfectly true. Again, I mean, what I'm picking up is actually almost a degree of exasperation. The Americans have been saying this in, shall we say, genuinely private conversations for some time now, and the Ukrainians have ignored them. And that's why I think they went to the level of leaking this. It's a natural part of politics. But again, I mean, I really think that there is a danger of making too much of this. This is just simply the Americans saying, this is actually how you can improve the current sort of public messaging to help ensure that those people who want to continue to support you will actually have the kind of public backing that they need to do that. There is absolutely no question, even almost certainly with the midterms in the States, which is currently sort of going on, that there's going to be any change in the American position, and nor likely to be in any of the substantial backers within Europe. But there is a worry that it could happen, and therefore it's really an attempt to try and prevent that from becoming a real problem.
Just finally and very briefly, but just humour the cynic in me. Has it got anything to do with the midterms?
It has, in the sense of there is a real worry among, shall we say, the officialdom here in DC, that precisely if there is a change in control of the legislature, things might get a lot harder. I mean, at the moment, for example, they ask, whenever they ask for, I don't know, 10 billion support for the Ukrainians, then Congress gives them 20. So at the moment, there is no problem at all. But there is this concern that actually we might be heading into an era of slightly more political tension over how much, not whether to support Ukraine, but how much to support Ukraine. And that's why, in a way, they are begging Kyiv, give us a hand.